You guys are in for a real treat today. You know, I thought I did a lot to help entrepreneurs and CEOs during the pandemic, but this guy blows me away. Today, I'm visiting with Loren Feldman. Before I get into introducing Loren, let me tell you a little bit about why we're here and how we got here, and it helps for you to see why I'm so excited to visit with Loren today. When the pandemic hit and we got shut down back in March of 2020, like a lot of you, I was looking to find ways that I could help. But I didn't have a liquor distillery that I could shut down and make hand sanitizer, but I was a good connector. I am a good facilitator, and I created these CEO forums as a way to help business owners navigate and really come out stronger on the backside of COVID. That led to an article series, a weekly blog article that I wrote called Survival and Thrival, LinkedIn Live series called Survival and Thrival, because again, we didn't want to just survive the pandemic. We wanted to come out stronger. That led to the end of 2020 where we got tired of talking about the pandemic. We got tired of talking about survival and thrival. So we said, you know what? There's no excuses anymore. We've got to figure out a way. Let's go. So we created the Let's Go podcast series. And now we're helping entrepreneurs and CEOs really do whatever it takes to execute their vision, usually by building kick-ass teams. And we're getting you behind the scenes with great entrepreneurs and thought leaders like Loren Feldman. So all of that stuff is interesting, not really gold star worthy, but let's talk about Loren Feldman. I think you're really going to appreciate what he has done over 2020 and into 21. First of all, just a snippet about his background. He is a former senior editor at Inc. magazine, Forbes magazine, and New York Times, yada, yada. That's all interesting. He's spoken at a lot of really cool conferences on entrepreneurship and seminars. He is knee deep in the entrepreneur world, and he's an entrepreneur guru. In 2018, he founded 21 Hats, which is an online community for entrepreneurs, as well as a daily newsletter focused on resources for entrepreneurs. Really, really cool stuff. But I want to focus today on what he started in early 2020, the 21 Hats podcast, where he followed 7 business owners throughout 2020, throughout all the craziness of the pandemic, into 21, talking about all of the things that are going through their minds and hearts and souls in their businesses through 2020. And Loren was the wizard that pulled all that together and just did an incredible job of allowing us to get behind the scenes of these great business owners. Loren, man, I'm so stoked about today's discussion. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, Kurt, my pleasure. Thank you for having me here. That was a really generous introduction. I appreciate it. The only thing I quibble with is that I, in some way, did more than you. I very much doubt that, but thank you.
We could go back and forth on who's did a better job of during the pandemic. We'll have some pandemic bro wars or something, but I do want to talk about the podcast. So when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that you had the idea for following these 7 business owners before March of 2020. You started doing the podcast in January. Man, tell us a little bit about behind the scenes, what was going on in your mind? Why did you decide to do it? And just the incredible gift that you provided all of us during 2020. Talk about that.
Well, you know, part of it stems from the idea that a lot of business owners feel isolated. You know, I've been covering them, as you said, for about 20 years now at Inc., at the Times, and at Forbes. And you know, some owners find a forum like yours, they find their tribe, they connect with other people, they have a network, but I think they're kind of in the minority. Some people just feel they don't have the time, they may not have the money, they may be in an area where there just aren't such groups, or they may have tried a group and it wasn't a good group, so they walk away from it. So the idea behind the podcast initially was to, you know, have a conversation that people who aren't part of that conversation can listen in on. And even if they can't join the conversation and ask their own questions and offer their own insights, they can hear other people like them doing that. And that was the basic idea. As you said, we started in January of 2020 with, of course, no idea what was coming. I didn't know how long we would stick with the same group. You know, I figured we'd kind of play it by ear, see how it went. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and our thinking changed.
Wow. Just the type of conversations that you're having with these guys and gals it struck me how open they were to allowing you and the audience behind the scenes of what's going on in their head.
It's amazing to me that they are as open as they are. You know, some of it was just luck. I found a group of people, and they're from all different parts of the country. They're from different industries, but they connected with each other. They like each other. They enjoy talking to each other. Sometimes I turn off the record button at the end of our session and they keep talking for another hour. And it kills me because sometimes there's really good stuff in there that I wish I could share. There was a little bit of luck involved with that. They were people that I knew beforehand, though. So I knew that they were doing this because they wanted to share their lessons. If they learned something the hard way, they could help somebody learn it an easier way. And they weren't joining the podcast just looking for promotion. You know, there are easier ways to promote your company than going on a brand new podcast. They put a lot of time into this, and they're willing to share. And, you know, some of what they share is, you know, really tough emotional stuff. Some of it is mistakes that they make. Some of it is their finances, actual numbers of how much money they take out of the business or would like to take out of the business.
Man, I find that so refreshing. And here's why. I think most success stories or successful entrepreneurs talk about all the great stuff that they've done, all the money that they've made, and everybody wants to emulate that. No one really talks about the slog and how hard it is to truly be an entrepreneur or a business owner. And while money may come, doesn't always come, and there's a boatload of heartache and struggles along the way.
I think you put your finger on something really important there. And I think people like me in the media have been guilty of often putting our focus in the wrong place. There's so much attention given to the huge success stories. And you know, those are great. They can be really inspirational, and there's a place for that. But there are a lot of other stories, and we don't work as hard to find those other stories. And I think that's really important. So, you know, what I was trying to do, I bet the conversations we have are a lot like the conversations in your forums. And, you know, that's very different than spending 20 minutes with somebody who's had a huge success, went public, is a unicorn or whatever it might be. You know, tell me in 20 minutes how you became a unicorn. You can only get so much out of that. But if you're in your forums, am I right? You sit around there and you talk about the real stuff.
Oh, yeah. I noticed on your last podcast, the intersection of personal and business, and you had some, one of your guests was just gotten back from vacation, and the other two said, vacation, I haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. And just the personal stories and just the authenticity was amazing.
There was, you're referring to a woman named Laura Zander, who has a business called Jimmy Bean's Wool. She sells yarn. She's based in Reno, but she bought a business in Fort Worth. And since June a year ago, she's been spending 2 weeks out of the year in Fort Worth. And as a result, she's been away from her now 12-year-old son. And she told us on the podcast, you know, the pain that's caused her, that she's realized her son is closer to his father than he is to her. And it hurts knowing that. That's the kind of conversation that has, I didn't ask about that. These people just have enough confidence in each other to share those kinds of things.
And that's the kind of stuff I think needs to be shared for other aspiring entrepreneurs or just other business owners or executives in any industry, because it is real. We do have to sacrifice something at the end of the day. And maybe it's your business, maybe it's your fitness, maybe it's your time with kids and spouse.
Right now, one of the topics that comes up all the time is, you know, where do you find people? How do you hire? Now, this happens to be a topic you know a lot more about than I do. But, you know, again, we go, everybody's trying something different. And that's the kind of thing we focus on. By the way, do you have any good answers to that?
It depends on the level. I know one of the ones you guys were talking about were entry-level warehouse workers and restaurant workers and things like that. That is one of the biggest challenges right now. Business owners are competing with Uncle Sam for employees because they still get paid more for not working than they get paid for working. So that's be an ongoing challenge. At our level, we're typically working with executive level hires, and it's still a challenge. It's very much a candidate-driven market right now. So many companies are trying to hire A players, and A players have a lot of choices. So you have to have a really compelling story to sell them. You might have to be willing to let them work remotely now that everybody knows how the virtual world can be successful. And it's still very, very competitive for A talent.
But people are struggling with that. I mean, I think a lot of people are making up their minds about, am I okay hiring an A player who's going to work remotely? I mean, you know, maybe it's one thing if it's an engineer, a developer, but somebody who's going to be, more part of the organization. Do you want that person remote? Also, just the mechanics of doing it. I mean, can you identify the right A player interviewing them over Zoom? A lot of interesting questions as a result of what we've been through the past year.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the past it would be, hell no, you can't do that. You can't hire somebody just on Zoom. In today's environment, I think you can. I think people understand you can. They still want to put face to face. They want to get in person for the final round, if you will. But a lot of this stuff, like stuff you and I are doing, we know each other very well just from having these Zoom conversations. I'd still love to meet you face to face and have a cup of coffee with you, but there's a lot we can do virtually. Now, I'm still a fan of having somebody in my town, at least, even if not in my office. But there are more and more people getting comfortable with either fully remote or at least commuting. And it didn't have to be commuting every day like it did back 5 years ago. Loren, I talked a little earlier about people pivoting their business, pivoting from a liquor distillery to a hand sanitizer is the popular one you hear about. I had a healthcare or hospital inventory company that started supplying PPE like gloves and masks and so forth and sourcing them from their folks in Korea and whatnot. That was a big part of their business in 2020. But you shared with me the other day about the anti-pivot story, I'm going to say. The company that actually said, you know what, I'm not going to do anything to change. And tell me a little bit about how that went down with Paul Downs.
Paul's another person who's on the podcast, someone I've known for quite a few years. And I've actually heard this from a couple of businesses, but I think his is the best example. And it just makes what I think is a really important point, which is that when it comes to building a business, one size does not fit all. You can't say that what works for someone is necessarily going to work for someone else. And I think Paul's a great example of that. When the pandemic hit, he makes high-end custom conference tables. These things can cost $30,000 to $50,000. He sells them primarily to other small business owners, also, law firms and investment banks and universities. But his primary customer is someone like you, someone, like him himself. And guess what? Business owners weren't buying a lot of custom conference tables a month or two into the pandemic. With everybody working remotely, no one was sure when anybody would be back in an office. And these tables cost $30,000 or $50,000. So when his phone stopped ringing, he had a real issue on his hands. Now, fortunately, his phone didn't completely stop ringing. So some of those institutional clients continued to call, and that kept him going. But a lot of people were telling him, you should really, with everybody working from home, why don't you start building desks that people can buy to set up their home office? And he thought about it, but he realized, it's a very different price point. And there are a lot of other people out there that are very good at that. And he would have to retrofit his, manufacturing facility. Was it worth doing all that? He considered it. He ultimately rejected it. It was a tough year. He hung in there. But now in June of 2021, he is on pace to have his best year ever. And again, I think it just makes the point that one size does not fit all.
That's awesome. I think that it's a good example of folks, entrepreneurs who listen to all the voices around them. Everybody has an opinion about your product or service, especially if you're in the restaurant business or something like that. And so having the fortitude to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to stick it out is kudos to him, because I know there's a lot of voices probably telling him you need to shift your model, and who knows how long this thing's going to last.
I think you just made a really important point. I mean, to start a business, you kind of have to be a little stubborn, because there are going to be a lot of people who tell you, you're crazy. Why would you quit a good job to try this? It's never going to work. What are you doing? So you have to, you fight through that. But then at some point you reach kind of the limits of your experience and knowledge, and you have to rely on the advice of others. So it's a tough transition. And then it can go back in the situation we just described with Paul, where you got to be stubborn again. You got to stick to what you know. You tell me, how does an entrepreneur negotiate that? How do you figure out when to take advice and when not to?
Boy, I tell you, that is one of the biggest challenges challenges, because if you don't listen to the people around you, you might find yourself with a product or service nobody wants. And if you listen to everybody, you're going to be like a ping pong ball, always shifting what you do. So I think it's having a mindset for a vision for what you're trying to create, and enough hubris, if you will. Hubris, is that the word?
Yep.
And enough hubris to determine that your answer is not necessarily the right one. You're willing to shift a bit within those guardrails, within the mindset of your vision. But if you just willy-nilly follow what everybody says, you're never going to get off the ground.
Yep, exactly.
I can't tell you how many people told me when I started my previous company, no one's going to pay for that. And so you get some doubts in your mind, and finally you say, F you, I'll make it work. And of course we made it work. So Loren, let me shift gears one more time. We've got a really cool story that I want to ask you about, and that is Jack Stack. I'm calling this one Mastering the Recession. You shared with me that this is his fourth recession, and he's been able to double his business each time. So I'm taking notes right now for the next recession. Tell me what happened with Jack.
This guy is, I don't say this a lot. This guy's a genius who should be much better known than he is. He runs a company called SRC. It stands for Springfield Remanufacturing Corp. He took over a business about 40 years ago. I didn't take over a business. He took over a failing international harvester plant in Springfield, Missouri, with a bunch of his buddies, and they borrowed a bunch of money. This was, back in the Carter days. I think they had like an 18% interest rate or something. I don't know how they got the loan, but they did. And they turned that into what is today a $600 million business, most of it manufacturing related, but a whole bunch of different lines. They did it with a couple of things. One was it's entirely employee owned, which is interesting. The other is he's kind of the father of open book management, because he and a bunch of his buddies started this business. They just shared all the information, and they realized it's kind of a great way to run a business. In fact, he calls it the only way to run a business, because what he learned is that if all the decisions come top down, you miss out on a lot of great insights, because those people in the front lines, they're the ones who really know what's going on. And if you teach them what drives the business, if they know which products are better margin than other products, they're going to help you figure out a way to make your company more profitable. And if you're in trouble, they're going to help you figure out ways to cut costs and keep the thing going. So really an interesting guy. One of the things he learned early on is that recessions are opportunities. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, whether that's layoffs or, cutting back. But if possible, you have to look for ways to get back on offense. And he figured out that things are cheap during recessions, and sometimes you can buy a lot of stuff. He bought a great company during the Great Recession, and that for almost nothing. And that inspired him to prepare for the next one. And he decided he was going to dedicate himself to setting aside, this is a fairly large company, 600 million in revenue. He set aside a break when ready box of cash. He set aside $100 million. He hit that amount just in time for the pandemic. Unfortunately for him, this one cut a little bit differently. He did well, but because of all the government intervention, things didn't get as cheap as they did in the Great Recession. So the opportunities to buy businesses weren't quite there. He did buy some real estate. But again, you're absolutely right. It's the fourth time he's done that. Each time up until this one, I'm not sure about this one, but until this one, he doubled the company's value each time.
I love the perspective, the going on offense. When times are tough, that's a time to really double down on certain things. And we preached that early on. I got some good advice from friends Randstagen, Craig Wiley at Transcend Business, the folks at CEO Coaching International. And we really tried to give our entrepreneurs and CEOs the same type of mindset. We need to batten down the hatches, and absolutely we need to cut costs and survive. But at the same time, we need to be looking at ways to improve our business coming out. And I think that was a great lesson. And I think we can always be improving our businesses.
Even in tough times. I've talked to a lot of business owners who started their business like during the Great Recession, and people will say to them, oh my God, what a terrible time. Actually, you know what? It's actually a good time, because if you can make it then, you're going to be in great shape when the tide comes back in. That's something that a lot of people miss, I think.
The recessions are always a time when people lose their jobs. And so that's when a lot of entrepreneurs are born, sometimes not because they want to, but because they have to. But yeah, you're right. A lot of entrepreneur stories coming from recessions. So let me ask you, what kind of other silver linings have you seen coming out of 2020? And as we're coming here in near midpoint, today's the midpoint of 21.
Kind of hard to believe. I think they're all over the place. I think we've learned so many things that perhaps we always should have known. Just, the fact that you and I are having this conversation over Zoom probably wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. There's just so much, we might not even know each other without the pandemic. And
well, you're a Yankee, I'm a dumb Texan. We never would have known each other in the first place.
Well, we have some mutual friends, and if we'd been in the same place at the same time, maybe we would have connected. But now we know, and that's it's not just social or just networking. It's business. I mean, look at what the sales teams have learned. Sales teams who felt they had to travel around the world to make a sales call, and now can stay in one place and make 3 sales calls in a day instead of getting on a plane. We now know we can do that. That's an amazing thing. For me personally, it's been a really big deal. I quit a good job at Forbes in September of 2018 to partner with somebody. As we discussed, I'd worked at Inc., the Times, and Forbes. I had great experiences at each of them. At each of them, I felt like I got a little closer to what I really wanted to do, but I never quite got where I wanted to go. I never quite was able to create the community of business owners that I wanted to create, because I was working at a company that had a slightly different view of its mission. And not that they were wrong, they were right. They know their business better than I did. And I don't mean to insult them in any way, but at the New York Times, I was looking for resources, and their response would be, we can do it for you and create this community for business owners, or we can do a cooking app, which, everybody eats. I think we're going to do the cooking app, but we like your idea and we'll try to get back to you. Except they never quite got back to me. So, I'm not saying they were wrong, but I just hadn't quite figured out how to do this. And then I met somebody and we decided to partner on it. And in the fall of 2018, we got excited. He had a business that served entrepreneurs. He had about 4 or 5 different businesses. He was already thinking of building a platform that would connect them. I convinced him to be a little bit more ambitious and not build a platform just for its existing customers, but to try to build the platform for business owners and bring in new people, some of which would make our platform profitable in and of itself, but also spin off business for his existing businesses. So we convinced each other. We had a great idea. We were all excited. We got off to a good start. We did the daily email, which you referred to, the newsletter, which aggregates all the most important news of the day specifically for business owners. We got that up to 5,000 subscribers. We did the podcast, and I spent the fall of 2019 working with developers to design a platform that would be a combination of content and community, like Slack channels where business owners could connect with each other and have conversations and help each other, compare notes. And then the pandemic hit, and it had been my idea and his money. And as a result of the pandemic, unfortunately, his money went away. We parted on very good terms. He was very generous. He gave me the things that we had built together. He gave me some severance so that I had a little bit of runway. If I had a choice, I'd rather have kept doing it with his money. But here I am today, as a result of the pandemic, owning the whole thing myself, making my own mistakes, making my own calls, and kind of having the time of my life. So I'm bootstrapping it. I haven't figured out that monetization thing yet. I'm still experimenting and trying different things, but I'm pretty confident that I'm going to get there, and I'm really excited that it's mine. So I see that as a real silver lining.
Hey, let me ask you a few fun questions. I'll ask them in a rapid fire type format, and whatever comes to mind, help me out. First one is, tell me something about you that we wouldn't find out from reading your LinkedIn profile.
I'm a big baseball fan. I played a little mediocre second base when I was in high school. I didn't make my college team, but I was working on a story in the Dominican Republic back, I don't know, more than 20 years ago, and met a scout for the Texas Rangers, and we became close friends. And he invited me. At one point, my wife and I decided to take a break from our jobs, and we went to work for him in San Pedro de Macorís in the Dominican Republic, which you may know is the town that all the shortstops come from. And he had a Texas Rangers training site there. My wife and I hung out there for 4 months, and I coached first base. I hit some fungos. I pitched some batting practice. I had the time of my life. Awesome. My wife speaks Spanish very well, and she taught English to the minor leaguers who were getting sent to play in the Texas farm system. So it was just a great experience getting to know
so
the country. It's not on my LinkedIn profile.
I love that question. You always get something interesting. Great. Thanks for sharing. All right. What are you most excited about for the future of your podcast?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure what I'm most excited about. I guess, I'll give you two answers. I'm excited. The interesting thing about it is that we went into the pandemic and we really didn't know if everybody was going to survive it or not. At this point, I can tell you everybody has survived, and I think that they will go on. They're all going to make it. But it's been a struggle, and having gotten to know these people and seen them at really difficult moments, I'm excited to see their success going forward. So maybe that's the best answer to your question. I had to talk it out and think it through. But yeah, that's it. Because it was really touch and go for a couple of them, and to have them on solid ground now and feeling like they can make it through anything and knowing that they're pointed in the right direction, that's a great thing.
All right. What is maybe your favorite story, best success story, anything like that you might want to share from your podcast?
I'm going to go back to Paul Downs again. Paul actually approached me for the first time back in 2009 during, the worst of the Great Recession. And at that time, just like I described how tough it was for him during the pandemic, it was even tougher for him back then. I was at the New York Times. I had just started a small business blog. I was signing up contributors, and he sent me an email and said, I've been reading the blog. It's pretty good. You're missing one thing. You should have somebody writing about what it's like to be running a business that's failing and is about to go through bankruptcy. And I thought, you know what, if this guy can write it all and is willing to actually do this, I want to do it, because who else is going to volunteer to do that? It turned out he's a very good writer, and he was very willing to share what he was going through. And we started going through what had gone wrong at his business and why it was failing and why he was headed for bankruptcy. But the best thing about it was he managed to turn it around. And he actually mentioned this on a podcast that we just taped yesterday. We're going to publish it next week. It'll be out by the time you publish this. He actually credits writing for the New York Times blog with being an important part of turning his business around in two ways. He didn't sell any more tables because of it, but it forced him to think differently about how he was running the business. Suddenly, he realized, if I'm going to have to explain this decision to the readers of the New York Times, maybe I want to give this another thought. I want to think about this a little bit before I just shoot from the hip. And he thinks he became, a smarter owner. And that was really important. But even more important than that, we had a very loyal following. We got a lot of great comments. And because he was so willing to share, because he's so transparent, he helped a lot of people, and a lot of people wanted to help him. So he could post something on a Monday, like, all right, here are my 3 biggest problems this week. And people would spend hours giving him answers. We would get these, really long, analyzing his marketing or his website or whatever he was struggling with. People who clearly should have been working on something else would devote inordinate amounts of time to trying to help him because they had gotten so much out of him. That's kind of my favorite story. And I think it says a lot about entrepreneurs, because Paul's not alone in that. Entrepreneurs are so willing to share, to help people learn from their mistakes. I mean, I'm a reporter. I've covered all kinds of things. Try finding politicians who will do that. Try finding athletes who will do that. They don't, but entrepreneurs will do it, even if it helps the competitor. They want people to learn from their mistakes. They want to learn from other people's mistakes. That's the only reason I can do what I do.
That's got to make you feel good to create that environment for people to share those stories of success and failure, to be just the glue that holds that together. Loren, I really appreciate what you guys are doing at 21 Hats.
Well, you're doing kind of the same thing, and it's really an honor to be here with you, Kurt. Thanks for taking the time with me.
You bet, man. Thanks so much for being here, Loren. It's been a pleasure. And that wraps another episode of Let's Go. We're going to be continuing our behind the scenes discussions with entrepreneurs and thought leaders to help entrepreneurs build great businesses and build kick-ass teams. So thanks for joining us. Until next time, remember our mantra: there's no excuses. We've got to find a way. Let's go.
I hope you got what you were looking for.